Hi and welcome to another gaming video, and in today's video I want to talk about the Sega Dreamcast VMU, which is quite possibly Sega's smallest console. So the Dreamcast came with a lot of forward thinking and a lot of cool innovations, and one of its biggest innovations is the VMU, or the Visual Memory Unit, which is the Dreamcast memory card. So unlike the Saturn with its internal memory or a large expansion slot at the back, the Dreamcast memory card was more like the PlayStation, only these went into the controller, whereas on the PlayStation it goes into the device itself. And you can actually plug two in, so you pop them in the controller itself, and you can plug a second one in the second slot. And you can move sort of game save files from one to the other. But the VMU is no ordinary boring memory card. If you just look at it, it looks different. It's got buttons, it's got a D-pad, it's got a screen. But before we get into the buttons, etc., we'll take a look at the screen. Now, if this controller was actually plugged into my Dreamcast, but it isn't, when you pop it in to a Dreamcast controller, the screen would light up, and the screen of the VMU can be seen through the Dreamcast controller. So if I just take that out, you can see there's like a hole there. Each VMU can have its own icon, and it will show you what game you're playing on the screen itself, just in case you forget what you're playing. So if it's in the controller, the game title will display on there, but it can also do other things depending on what sort of game you're playing. It can show lives remaining or health status for some games. It can even offer a second screen, something like virtual tennis. You could actually play the whole game just by looking at the screen on the VMU. If you're playing silent scope, it will show you a target. So these are cool little things. But the VMU is more than just a fancy memory card. It can actually be used independently. So in a previous video, I replaced the batteries in both of these. And if the batteries work, they take little CR2032s. You can get them, there we go, come on. So you got a little display there, and calling it a console is a bit of a stretch. Let's stop calling it a console. Although it's got buttons, it can do things, and it can play some little mini games. So some games had downloadable content that you could play and use separately on these. So things like Sonic Adventure, Power Stone, and I think Quake 3 Arena had some sort of mini game that you could play on these. Sega GT had a mini racing game. Sonic Adventure had some sort of KO Adventure, I think it's called. The Skies of Arcadia had Pintus Quest. And obviously, with anything in the gaming world, the homebrew scene has taken over, and you can get homebrew developed games, mini games that run on these. So you can get things like a Pac-Man, a Tetris, a VMU Fighter, which is like a little fighting game, VMU Football. There's even a VMU first-person shooter. So it's got a D-pad, and it's got an A and B button. They look a bit like a mini Game Boy. The top connector isn't just for plugging into the controller port either. You can actually plug two together and transfer things from one VMU to the other. And that's a very unique little sort of memory card, mini console type thing for the Dreamcast. So, like I said, I've already replaced the batteries in these. They take two CR2032s, and they don't last very long. The batteries on them don't last very long, especially if you've downloaded some game onto it and you're playing it. If you leave these, they will just go to sleep by themselves, so they don't waste the battery. And even if the batteries do die, you can still use them as memory cards in the controller. It will not wipe it just because the battery is dead. As you can see, that one is just shut off. And there's actually a sleep button so you can turn them off. Boop. And there was a project for a VMU2 which had an enhanced upgraded VMU with better screen, USB charging, but these are super expensive. But if you're a Dreamcast diehard fan, you might find those quite good. So the VMU is a mini console. I am going to call it a mini console because it's got buttons and you can play games on it, albeit just sort of little mini games. So it is probably Sega's smallest ever console, and quite possibly one of the smallest games devices out there. Sony did release something similar. It's called the Pocket Station. It's a similar concept to these, but I think it was only released in Japan, but it wasn't as cool as the VMU. So for all Sega's commercial failures, they did like to push the boat out. They did like to innovate in their consoles. So the VMU is a prime example of that. So there you go. Not really much more to say. This is a little mini piece of gaming history. A time when Sega liked to push the envelope and bring out something a bit different, and memory cards with a screen that could sort of play games and be a bit more independent than just a bog standard PlayStation memory card. The Dreamcast VMU is amazing, and even if you buy one and you don't have a Dreamcast, that is just a cool little thing to have sort of displayed somewhere. Oh yeah, do stand. So on a side note, I've been a Dreamcast fan for over 20 years, and I've never really had a working VMU. All of the ones I've bought, the batteries had run out and I'd just left and used them as regular memory cards. But there you go, that is just a little brief look at one of Sega's greatest little tiny innovations on a console that pushed the envelope, but was well, it just didn't do very well. The Dreamcast is one of the poorest selling consoles ever, and in my opinion it's one of the greatest consoles ever. And this little VMU here, this memory card with a screen and buttons, are just fantastic little things. So there you go, Dreamcast VMUs. Link, like, subscribe, enjoy.